The USS Resolute sat dead in the water, a silent giant in the middle of the Pacific. Just hours earlier, it had been slicing through swells with quiet confidence, part of a major multinational naval exercise near Okinawa. Now it drifted like a beached whale, powerful, expensive, and utterly stuck. The ship's advanced hybrid propulsion system, a marvel of modern engineering with its mix of electric and diesel power, had shut down without warning. No alarms, no smoke, just silence where there should have been a deep, steady hum. On the bridge, tension hung thick in the air. Officers exchanged tight-lipped glances. Radios crackled with updates from command, each one more urgent than the last. The fleet couldn't wait. The exercise schedule was tight, and the Resolute was supposed to lead a critical maneuver in less than 48 hours. If it didn't move soon, the whole operation would shift, and not in their favor. Below deck, in the heart of the engineering spaces, a small army of specialists worked under harsh fluorescent lights. They weren't just any technicians. These were the best the Navy and its top defense contractors could send. Engineers flown in from shipyards across the country, some with PhDs, others with decades of experience troubleshooting the Navy's most complex systems. Laptops were open everywhere. Cables snaked across metal grates, and diagnostic software scrolled endless lines of code and sensor data. Yet nothing made sense. "It's not overheating," one engineer muttered, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill of the air conditioning.
"Oil pressure's normal."
"Voltage stable, but the main drive just won't engage." Another tapped furiously at a touchscreen, pulling up schematics that looked like blueprints for a spaceship. "The control module says everything's green, but the engine won't spin. It's like it's asleep and won't wake up." They'd run every test in the manual, rebooted systems, swapped out circuit boards, checked for software glitches, even brought in a portable oscilloscope to hunt for electrical ghosts. Nothing. The engine remained stubbornly silent. Morale began to sink faster than the sun on the horizon. Young sailors watched the experts with wide eyes, hoping for a breakthrough. Older crew members exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen ships break down before, but never like this. This wasn't a snapped belt or a clogged filter. This felt deeper, almost personal, as if the ship itself had decided to stop. In the mess hall that evening, whispers replaced normal chatter. Some joked darkly about gremlins in the engine room. Others wondered if a rival nation had slipped in some kind of digital sabotage, though no evidence supported it. Most just felt helpless. They were trained to fight, to navigate, to operate. But when the very thing that moved them through the ocean refused to cooperate, they were stranded in more ways than one. Back in engineering, one young technician named Leo, barely 2 years out of training, sat alone near a console, replaying the moment the engine cut out. He'd been on watch. 1 second, everything was smooth. The next, a low, odd vibration, almost musical, rippled through the deck plates. Then silence. He remembered it clearly. But when he mentioned it to the lead engineer, the man had waved it off. Probably just resonance from the sea state, he'd said. Not relevant, but Leo wasn't so sure. That sound hadn't felt normal. It was too precise, too rhythmic, like a tuning fork struck underwater. Meanwhile, aboard the command ship Iron Keel, Admiral Cho stood on the observation deck, arms crossed, staring at the distant silhouette of the Resolute. She'd served on destroyers herself, back when radar screens were the size of dinner plates and coffee was brewed in dented pots. She knew ships didn't just break without reason. There was always a story, a missed maintenance note, a worn part, a human decision made in haste. And she also knew that sometimes the right answer didn't come from a manual or a software patch. Sometimes it came from someone who'd spent years listening to engines like they were old friends. She pulled out her secure phone and scrolled through a contact list most would have deleted years ago. At the bottom, under V Retired, was a name. Elias Voss. She hadn't spoken to him in over a decade, not since he'd walked away from the Navy after a bitter argument over over-reliance on automation. He'd called it trusting screens more than senses. Back then, people thought he was stubborn. Now, staring at a $2 billion ship that wouldn't move, Cho wondered if he'd been right all along. She typed a short message. "Engine down on Resolute. No one can fix it." Sound like a low harmonic hum before it died. "You still listen to engines?" She hit send and waited. The Pacific breeze tugged at her uniform. Somewhere far away, in a quiet coastal town where seagulls outnumbered people, A phone buzzed on a workbench cluttered with wrenches, oil cans, and hand-sketched diagrams. A man with salt and pepper hair and grease-stained fingers picked it up. He read the message twice. Then he walked over to an old filing cabinet, pulled out a faded notebook bound with twine, and flipped to a page marked Harmonic Coupling, Project Triton, 2008. His eyes narrowed. He remembered that sound, and he knew exactly what it meant. But for now, on the Resolute, hope was running thin. The experts packed up for the night, exhausted and frustrated. The ship rocked gently in the swell, its massive turbines cold and still. The stars came out, indifferent to human plans. And somewhere in the dark, a problem waited, not for more data, but for someone who knew how to truly listen. The clock ticked. The fleet waited, and the ocean, vast and patient, kept moving without them. The phone buzzed again just before dawn. Elias Voss was already awake, had been since 4 a.m., rebuilding a carburetor for a vintage fishing boat that hadn't run in 10 years. His shop, tucked behind a weathered cedar fence in Port Townsend, smelled of oil, sawdust, and strong coffee. He wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better decades and glanced at the screen. It was her, Admiral Cho, one word this time, please. He sighed. He hadn't worn a uniform in 12 years. Hadn't set foot on a Navy ship since the day he walked off the pier, fed up with meetings that lasted longer than repairs, and technicians who couldn't tell a bearing knock from a loose bolt without running a diagnostic scan. He'd built this quiet life on purpose, fixing outboard motors for locals, teaching weekend workshops at the maritime school, sleeping with the windows open so he could hear the tide. Peaceful, predictable, human. But that sound she mentioned, the low harmonic hum, had hooked something deep in his gut. He'd heard it once before, back in 2008, during sea trials for an experimental propulsion prototype. A flaw in the coupling between the electric motor and the reduction gear. Not a failure exactly, more like a mismatch in rhythm, like two dancers stepping on each other's toes. The engineers at the time had called it acceptable noise. Voss had argued it was a warning. 6 months later, the same system seized during a storm off Iceland. No one was hurt, but the repair cost millions. His report got buried. He'd been labeled resistant to innovation. That was the beginning of the end. Now, history was humming again. He called his neighbor, a retired fisherman named Dale, and asked him to keep an eye on the shop. Then he packed a duffel, his old tool roll stitched together with fishing line in 3 places, a thermos of black coffee, a change of clothes, and the notebook. No laptop, no fancy gear, just hands, eyes, ears, and memory. By noon, he was on a military transport jet heading west. The young airman who greeted him at the tarmac didn't recognize his name. Didn't know he'd once been the Navy's go-to guy for impossible engine failures. Voss didn't offer the story. He just nodded, climbed aboard, and stared out the window as the coastline shrank below. Meanwhile, aboard the Resolute, frustration had hardened into resignation. The contractor team had filed their final report. No identifiable mechanical or software fault. Recommend towing to dry dock for full disassembly. Translation: we give up. The Admiral's office had approved the tow, but not before one last-ditch effort. No one knew who was coming. Just that someone with legacy experience would arrive by helicopter at 1600 hours. Leo, the young technician, felt a flicker of hope. Legacy experience? Did that mean someone who'd actually worked on engines before everything went digital? He'd stayed up all night rereading old maintenance logs, cross-referencing sensor data with crew shift notes. He found something odd. The vibration had started right after a routine coolant flush. The procedure was standard, but the tech who performed it had used a substitute coupling gasket, approved but from a different batch. Could that tiny change throw off the whole system's balance? He mentioned it to his supervisor, who shrugged. If the software says it's fine, it's fine. But Leo wasn't convinced. Machines didn't lie. People did, sometimes by accident. At 3:55 p.m., the thump of rotor blades echoed across the deck. A Seahawk helicopter touched down, kicking up spray and wind. Out stepped a man in worn khakis and a faded ball cap, carrying a canvas bag that looked like it belonged in a museum. He moved slow but sure, like someone used to heavy tools and heavier decisions. No salute, no fanfare, just a quiet nod to the officer who met him at the hatch. "Voss," he said simply. The officer blinked. "Sir, we weren't told your rank." I don't have one anymore, Voss replied. Just show me the engine. They led him down past gleaming control panels and humming servers into the belly of the ship. The moment his boots hit the grating of the main engine room, he stopped, closed his eyes, listened. Silence. But not empty silence. Beneath it, a faint tension, like a guitar string tuned just slightly too tight. He walked to the main propulsion housing, placed his palm flat against the cool metal, and waited. 30 seconds passed. Then, almost imperceptibly, a whisper of vibration traveled up his arm. There it was. The same hum. Subtle but wrong. The lead engineer approached, arms crossed. We've run every diagnostic. All systems nominal. If there's a problem, it's not showing up. Voss didn't look at him. When did it start? 3 days ago, during high-speed maneuvers. Before or after the coolant system service? The engineer paused. After, but that's unrelated. The coolant loop is isolated from the drivetrain. Is it? Voss opened his bag and pulled out a stethoscope. Not the medical kind, but a mechanic's version. Brass and worn smooth from use. He pressed it to a flange near the secondary coupling. Listened. Moved 6 inches. Listened again. Then he crouched, peering into a narrow access panel. Who did the gasket replacement? He asked. Leo stepped forward before his supervisor could stop him. I was on shift. It was Tech Reyes. Used part number G734B, revision Delta. It's listed as compatible. Voss nodded slowly. Compatible on paper. But this revision's rubber compound is stiffer. Changes the damping frequency. He tapped the coupling. This little ring is supposed to absorb tiny shocks. Now it's reflecting them. Like hitting a drum instead of a pillow. Over time, those vibrations sync up with the motor's spin. Resonance builds. System thinks it's about to tear itself apart, so it shuts down to protect itself. The engineers exchanged glances. It sounded plausible, but it wasn't in any manual. And it couldn't be proven without tearing the whole assembly apart, which would take days. We can't authorize a repair based on intuition, the lead engineer said carefully. Voss looked at him, not angry, just tired. You ever fix a car by listening to it cough? No, sir. We use OBD scanners. Then you wouldn't understand. He turned to Leo. You feel that hum when you lean against the bulkhead near frame 42? Leo's eyes widened. Yes, right after midnight watch. Voss gave a small, almost invisible smile. Good ear. Just then, Admiral Cho's voice came over the intercom. Chief Voss, report to the bridge. He nodded, tucked his stethoscope away, and walked off without another word. The engineer stood in silence. Leo looked at the coupling, then at his notes. For the first time in days, the problem didn't feel like a mystery. It felt like a conversation. One someone finally knew how to hear. And up on the bridge, the Admiral waited, hoping she hadn't brought in a ghost from the past for nothing. But something in Voss's voice on the phone, the quiet certainty, told her he hadn't come just to look. He'd come because he already knew what was wrong. Now the real question was, would anyone let him fix it? The bridge was quiet when Voss stepped inside. Sunlight slanted through the windows, catching dust motes in the air. Admiral Cho stood near the navigation chart table, arms folded, eyes sharp but calm. She didn't waste time on formalities. You heard it, she said. Not a question. Voss nodded. It's singing the wrong note. She let out a slow breath. The engineers say your theory isn't supported by data. Data's only as good as the questions you ask it, he replied. They're looking for a broken part. But nothing's broken. It's just out of tune. Cho studied him for a long moment. She remembered him from years ago. Quiet, stubborn, always smelling faintly of machine oil and coffee. He'd once fixed a destroyer's generator during a typhoon using nothing but a pocket knife and a piece of copper wire. Command had written him up for bypassing safety protocols. She'd quietly shredded the report. Now, with a ship dead in the water and an international exercise hanging by a thread, she had to decide. Trust the man who listened to metal like it spoke, or stick with the team who trusted only what their screens told them. Walk me through it, she said, so he did. No jargon, no acronyms, just plain words. He explained how the new gasket, though technically compatible, was slightly less flexible. How that tiny change altered how vibrations moved through the system. How, over hours of operation, those vibrations built up like waves crashing in rhythm, until the engine's own sensors thought it was about to shake itself apart. So it shut down, not because something failed, but because it was trying to protect itself. It's like whispering a secret into a hallway. Voss said. If the walls are just right, the sound comes back louder. That's resonance, and this engine's been whispering to itself for 3 days. Cho understood. Not the engineering, she'd never claimed to be a mechanic, but the logic. Cause and effect. Human choices leading to mechanical consequences. That she knew well. She made her call. You have 6 hours. Full access. But you work with one of my people. Not the contractors. One of ours. Voss didn't argue. He knew she needed someone to watch him, and maybe learn something along the way. The young one, he said. The one who noticed the hum. Cho smiled faintly. Leo, he'll be waiting. Back in the engine room, Leo was already suited up, tools laid out neatly, heart pounding like a drum. He'd never worked with someone like Voss, someone who didn't need a screen to tell him what was wrong. When Voss arrived, he didn't say much, just handed Leo a small metal tuning fork. Tap this against the housing near the coupling, then put your ear to the bulkhead. Tell me what you hear, Leo did. A clear, high ping rang out. Then seconds later, a faint echo, lower, slower. It's dragging, he said. Exactly, Voss said. That echo shouldn't be there. It means energy's getting trapped, like water swirling down a clogged drain. For the next hour, they moved like a pair of old dance partners who'd never met. Voss pointed, Leo fetched. Voss listened, Leo watched. No shouting, no frustration, just focus. Voss didn't touch a single touchscreen. Instead, he traced pipes with his fingers, tapped flanges with a wrench, even smelled the air near vents. Oil's fine. No burning. Good. He asked Leo about the maintenance logs again. Who approved the gasket substitution? Supply chain flagged the original as back-ordered. The replacement was on the approved alternate list. Approved by who? A junior logistics officer. It's standard procedure, Voss grunted. Standard doesn't always mean right, especially when you're dealing with things that spin at 3,000 RPM. Then he did something that made Leo's stomach drop. He reached for a manual override panel, a small red-handled lever most crew hadn't touched since basic training. We're going to bypass the main control software, he said calmly. Leo froze, but that's not allowed without a level 4 authorization. Admiral gave me 6 hours, Voss said, meeting his eyes. She didn't say I had to follow the manual. Leo swallowed. This was the kind of thing that could end a career or save a ship. He looked at the silent engine, then at Voss's steady hands. What do you need me to do? Hold this, Voss said, handing him a torquey wrench, and watch the pressure gauge on the secondary loop. If it spikes past 45 psi, yell. They worked slowly, deliberately. Voss disconnected a series of safety interlocks, not recklessly, but with the care of someone who knew exactly what each one did. He rerouted coolant flow using manual valves, adjusted tension on a drive belt by hand, and, most surprisingly, inserted a thin brass shim between the coupling and its housing. It was no thicker than a playing card. Where'd you get that? Leo asked. Made it on the flight over, Voss said, pulling a small file from his pocket. Knew I might need it, Leo stared. This man had brought his own fix for a problem no one else even understood. By late afternoon, sweat soaked their shirts. The engine room felt hotter, louder, even though the main engine was still off. Every clink of a tool, every hiss of steam felt charged with meaning. Finally, Voss stepped back. All right, let's wake her up. He turned a manual ignition key, yes, an actual key on a backup control panel. Gears clicked. Pumps whirred. And then, a low rumble, not the smooth purr of normal operation, but a rough, hesitant growl. The pressure gauge jumped to 42 psi, held. She's breathing, Voss murmured. Leo watched the vibration monitor. The erratic spikes were gone. Now a clean, steady line. The hum, the wrong hum, had vanished, but the real test came next. Voss signaled the bridge. Request permission to engage main drive at 10% power. A pause. Then Cho's voice over the comms. Permission granted. Voss turned a dial. The engine groaned, then settled into a deep, even thrum. The deck plates vibrated, not with chaos, but with purpose. Somewhere above, the propeller shaft began to turn. Leo let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked at Voss, who was already wiping his hands on that same old rag, eyes on the gauges, calm as ever. You knew it would work? Leo said. Voss shook his head. I hoped. But machines don't care about hope. They care about balance. Up on the bridge, the officer of the deck checked his instruments. Propulsion restored. Speed increasing. Cho didn't cheer. She just nodded. watching the resolute silhouette straighten against the horizon. The ship was moving again, not because of a software update or a replacement part, but because someone remembered how to listen. And down below, in the warm, oily heart of the vessel, a young technician realized something. Expertise wasn't just about knowing what to fix. It was about knowing how to hear what needed fixing in the first place. The engine ran. Not perfectly, but steadily. That was enough for now. On the bridge, the navigation officer called out numbers as the ship inched forward, picking up speed like a tired horse finding its second wind. 2 knots, 4, 6, the rudder responded. The gyros stabilized. The Resolute was no longer dead in the water. She was alive again. But down in the engine room, no one was celebrating. Voss stood with his arms crossed, eyes locked on the main drive housing. Leo hovered nearby, watching the gauges like they might lie. The pressure was holding. Temperature was normal. Vibration levels had dropped by more than half. Still, Voss wasn't satisfied. "We're not done," he said quietly. Leo frowned. "But it's working." "Working isn't the same as right," Voss replied. "We jury-rigged a fix. Now we make it last." He turned to Leo. "Go get me a set of feeler gauges, thin ones, and find the original gasket spec sheet. Not the digital version. The paper one, if they still keep it." Leo blinked. "Paper? Some things shouldn't live only in a server." While Leo scrambled off, Voss knelt beside the coupling assembly, unscrewing a small inspection plate with a flathead screwdriver worn smooth from use. He peered inside, then pulled out a flashlight. Not the sleek LED kind, but an old metal one with a dented casing. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing hairline stress marks on the inner flange. Not cracks, not yet, but warnings. He'd seen this before. On that prototype back in '08, same pattern, same rhythm. If they left the stiff gasket in place, even with the brass shim, those marks would deepen. In a week, maybe 2, the coupling would seize during high-speed ops. And this time there'd be no quiet shutdown. It would be catastrophic, metal shearing, oil spraying, maybe fire. He couldn't let that happen. When Leo returned with the feeler gauges and a yellowed maintenance binder tucked away in a drawer, labeled Legacy Docs, and Voss flipped to a page with hand-drawn diagrams and coffee stains. "See this tolerance?" He pointed. 0.003 inches. That's the sweet spot. Any tighter and it binds. Any looser and it wobbles. The new gasket pushes it past that. Leo leaned in. "So we need the old one?" "We need the right one. And we're not going to wait for supply to ship it from Norfolk." He stood, wiped his hands, and walked over to a storage locker marked "Spare Parts Non-Critical." Most sailors ignored it. It held odds and ends from decommissioned ships, leftovers from upgrades, things deemed obsolete. Voss rummaged through bins of bolts, seals, and odd-shaped brackets until he found what he was looking for: a sealed plastic bag with a faded label. Inside was a gasket, original spec, same batch as the one removed days ago. "Where'd this come from?" Leo asked, amazed. "Old habits," Voss said. "I used to stash spares like this on every ship I served on, just in case someone decided newer meant better." He didn't waste time. With Leo's help, they drained the coolant loop, unbolted the coupling housing, and carefully removed the stiff replacement gasket. It looked fine to the untrained eye, smooth, intact, factory perfect. But Voss held it up to the light and flexed it slightly. "Too rigid," he muttered, like trying to hug someone wearing armor. The original gasket, by contrast, bent easily in his fingers, soft, responsive, human. They installed it with care, using the feeler gauges to check alignment at every bolt. Voss tightened each one in a star pattern, whispering numbers under his breath like a prayer. When they were done, he tapped the housing again with his wrench. This time the sound was clean, no echo, no drag. "Now," he said, "we test it the old way." He signaled the bridge again. "Request full power cycle, from idle to flank speed. Slow ramp." Admiral Cho didn't hesitate. "Granted." Up top, the helmsman eased the throttle forward. Down below, Voss and Leo stood side by side, eyes on the gauges, ears tuned to the engine's voice. The rumble deepened. The deck vibrated, not with chaos, but with strength. At 70% power, the harmonic hum tried to return, a faint ghost of the old problem, but the new old gasket absorbed it like a sponge. By the time they hit full speed, the engine was singing smooth and true. Leo let out a laugh, quiet, disbelieving. "It's perfect." Voss allowed himself a small nod. Machines want to work. You just gotta treat 'em right. Word spread fast. Within an hour, engineers who'd dismissed Voss were peeking into the engine room, eyes wide. The lead contractor rep stood in the doorway, arms crossed, but even he couldn't deny what the instruments showed. Stable temps, zero vibration anomalies, full propulsion restored. He cleared his throat. "We'll need a full report. For the record," Voss handed him the yellowed spec sheet. "Start here." Later that evening, as the Resolute sliced through dark water at cruising speed, Admiral Cho came down to the engine room. She didn't say much. Just watched Voss pack his tools, his movements slow but sure. "You didn't just fix an engine," she said finally. "You reminded us how to think." He zipped his bag. "I just listened," she smiled. "Sometimes that's the hardest part." Leo stood nearby, holding the brass shim Voss had made. "Can I keep this?" Voss looked at him. "You earned it. But don't treat it like a trophy. Treat it like a lesson." Back in his quarters that night, Leo couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the day, the sound of the engine waking up, the way Voss's hands moved like they'd done this 1,000 times, the quiet confidence in every decision. He opened his own notebook and began sketching, not schematics, but notes. Trust your ears. Question approved parts. Balance over specs. Meanwhile, Voss sat alone on a folding chair near a porthole, sipping coffee from a chipped navy mug someone had given him. He watched the wake trail behind the ship, silver under the moonlight. He hadn't planned on coming back, but maybe, just maybe, it was good to remind people that not everything worth knowing lives in a database. And out there, in the vast Pacific, the Resolute moved forward, not because of the newest tech, but because someone remembered how to listen to the old truths hiding in the metal, the oil, and the quiet spaces between the noise. The Resolute rejoined the fleet 2 days later, slipping into formation like it had never missed a beat. From the outside, nothing had changed. The gray hull gleamed in the sun, the radar spun steadily, the crew moved with practiced calm. But below deck, something had shifted. In the engine room, technicians no longer rushed to their screens at the first sign of trouble. Instead, they paused, listened, touched the metal, asked questions that didn't begin with, "What does the software say?" Leo was different too. He still wore his uniform the same way, still followed protocol. But now he carried a small notebook in his back pocket, its pages filled with sketches, observations, and quotes scribbled in the margins. One read, "Machines talk. You just gotta learn their accent." He'd written it the night Voss left, because Voss didn't stay. He'd packed his bag the morning after the full-speed test, shook hands with Admiral Cho on the hangar deck, and boarded the same Seahawk that brought him. No ceremony, no farewell speech. Just a quiet nod and a keeper running smooth. As the helicopter lifted off, Leo stood at the rail, watching until it vanished into the horizon. He didn't know if he'd ever see the man again, but he knew he'd carry what he'd learned for the rest of his career. Back in Port Townsend, Voss returned to his shop. The carburetor for the old fishing boat was still on the bench. The tide still rolled in twice a day. But something felt lighter. Not because he'd fixed a billion-dollar warship, but because someone had been ready to listen. That mattered more than medals or titles ever had. A week later, an official Navy email landed in his inbox. Rare, since he rarely checked it. It wasn't a request for another emergency. It was an invitation. The Naval Engineering School wanted to develop a new training module for propulsion technicians. Not just about codes and circuits, but about intuition, hands-on diagnostics, and the kind of deep listening that couldn't be taught by algorithms. They wanted him to help design it. He almost deleted it. Then he thought of Leo, standing in that engine room, ears tuned to a hum no one else heard, and typed a short reply. "Send me the outline. I'll look it over." He didn't say yes, not yet. But he didn't say no. Meanwhile, aboard the Resolute, life returned to rhythm. Drills resumed. Watches rotated. Meals were served on time. But in the engineering spaces, a quiet revolution was unfolding. The lead contractor team had filed their final report, this time including Voss's findings. The Navy quietly updated its parts compatibility guidelines, adding a new note. Material flexibility and harmonic response must be evaluated alongside technical specifications. It was a small line in a massive document, but it was a start. Leo was promoted to junior propulsion lead. Not because he'd fixed the engine, he hadn't, but because he'd asked the right question at the right time. His first act in the new role, he organized a weekly listening hour, a time when the engine room went quiet, screens were dimmed, and the crew walked the space with nothing but their senses. At first, some rolled their eyes, but after a junior tech caught a failing bearing by the faintest whine during one of those sessions, even the skeptic showed up. Admiral Cho, for her part, began quietly advocating for what she called balanced expertise in fleet readiness meetings. She didn't dismiss technology. She knew it saved lives. But she pushed for training that honored both the digital and the tactile, the data and the instinct. A ship is more than a collection of systems, she told a room of senior officers. It's a living thing. And like any living thing, it gives you signs if you're willing to notice them. Months passed. The exercise ended. The Resolute returned to port for scheduled maintenance. During the overhaul, engineers found something surprising. The coupling housing showed no new stress marks. The original spec gasket held perfectly. The brass shim, still in place, had done its job. Word of the fix spread through naval engineering circles, not as a headline, but as a story told in mess halls and machine shops. Remember the Resolute? When the old chief fixed what the computers couldn't? Voss never sought credit. He kept fixing outboard motors, teaching weekend classes, and drinking coffee with the gulls for company. But one afternoon, a package arrived at his shop. No return address. Inside was a framed photo. The Resolute cutting through open water, sunlight on her bow. On the back, in neat handwriting, it read, "She's running smooth. Thank you for teaching us how to listen." It was signed by the entire engineering division. He hung it on the wall above his workbench, between a rusted propeller and a faded photo of his first ship. Years later, when the Navy rolled out its new intuition and instrumentation training program, young technicians across the fleet learned about harmonic resonance, material fatigue, and the importance of cross-referencing sensor data with sensory observation. The curriculum included a case study, anonymous, but unmistakable, about a destroyer that wouldn't move, and the quiet man who heard what no one else could. Leo, now a senior chief, helped teach those classes. He never mentioned Voss by name, but he always ended the lesson the same way. Don't just look at the numbers. Put your hand on the machine. Listen to what it's trying to tell you, because sometimes the most advanced tool you have is your own attention. And far away in a small coastal town where the sea never stopped moving, an old man sat on his porch at dawn sipping coffee, listening to the rhythm of the waves. He didn't need thanks. He didn't need recognition. He'd done what he set out to do, not fix a ship, but remind people that behind every bolt, every circuit, every line of code, there were human hands, human choices, and human ears that still mattered. The ocean kept turning, the ships kept sailing, and somewhere in the hum of an engine, in the quiet between the noise, wisdom lived on, not in manuals, but in those willing to listen.